Hi, thank you so much. And just special thanks to Tommy and to everyone at CTL for organizing this year's festival and having us here. I'll just note also, I just put a few things in the chat that I'll be kind of referencing as we go. So today I'm going to share with you some of the results of a collaborative project called Crafting Communities, which I've worked on over the past 2 years with my colleagues, Mary Elizabeth Layton at the University of Victoria and Vanessa Warren at the University of Manitoba. As part of this project, we held a series of hands-on workshops over Zoom on 19th century crafting practices, such as eyelet embroidery, hair art, and scrapbooking. This year, funded by a SSHRC Connections grant for a project entitled Critical Crafting in and Beyond the Humanities Classroom, all three of us incorporated hands-on crafting into our teaching. And we're also working on a series of tutorials and lesson plans that will be openly accessible on our website, craftingcommunities.net. So over the next 15 minutes, you're going to hear about what happened when I brought hands-on crafting into an art history class on modern art that I taught this winter. Instead of studying familiar artworks by Pablo Picasso and Jackson Pollock, students learned about the history of modern visual and material culture. By crafting optical toys, collages, and rag rugs, and you can see some of those examples here. You're also going to hear from two students from the class, Priscilla Adebanji and Juliana Carrier, who will each share one of their assignments from the course and reflect on what they learned. So I want to just start by talking about 3 things that I wanted to accomplish by bringing crafting into the classroom. First, honing skills in critical reflection. At the Augustana campus, where I'm based, we've built critical reflection assignments into our new core curriculum. And I wanted to work on developing clear assignment prompts and rubrics to assess critical reflection. So for each of the 3 crafts students worked on as part of the course that are pictured here on the screen, they submitted a critical reflection that brought together the critical framework of our course readings with their hands-on experiences. Second, and related to critical reflection, I wanted to engage students in a different kind of learning experience by incorporating embodied learning and hands-on making into the classroom. This was particularly important to me in the context of the challenges of teaching during COVID, which had us all spending too much time in front of our screens instead of engaging with one another. Seeking strategies for meaningful engagement, I hope to move beyond delivering information from point A to point B, and instead find ways for students to use their hands and bodies to investigate a topic. So I took inspiration from Matt Rado's work on critical making, an approach that combines critical thinking with physical making to make, in his words, new connections between the lived space of the body and the conceptual space of scholarly knowledge. I was also inspired by the concept of embodied humanities proposed by Leith Davis and by Andrew Griffin. Embodied humanities ask students to put their bodies through the labors that other long dead bodies have previously performed, to generate a new kind of knowledge that shows students how the humanities connect with technology and material culture, both historically and in the present day. Finally, we come to my third goal of accessibility. By providing students with options to work with their hands and approach course materials in a variety of ways, I intended to provide ways for students to adapt the assignment to their own abilities. Students who are less skilled at the traditional essay had other ways to demonstrate their learning. At the same time, I explained to students that they wouldn't be assessed on the quality of their finished crafts, but on the quality of their engagement with course materials, so skill in crafting was not necessary. So I'm now going to pass things along to Juliana, who is going to talk to you about her collage project.
Thank you for the introduction, Andrea. The main objective of our course was to define modernity and modernism. Modernity is used to describe the state of the modern world, filled with an ever-changing reality of technological innovation, geopolitical changes, and the intensification of industrial capitalism. Modernism, on the other hand, describes a critical response to the conditions imposed by modernity. Modernism provided opportunities to redefine how to see the world without following conditions out by critics or society. To figure out what modernism looked like, the course took us through historical practice of historical practices of the cut and paste techniques of collage and scrapbooking. We explored the work of artists like Hawk, who believed that crafting, like any piece of fine art, should represent a documentation of one's own era. She empowered craftswomen to see their work not just as a mere women's pastime, but as a tool to lay claim to their economic and moral rights. Hawk's viewpoint helps us to understand how crafting can serve as a creative expression of how one sees the world and a tool for shaping reality. Modernist collage, like the one seen here by Hawk, calls attention to the physical nature of the various elements brought together on the page and the disjunctions and gaps between them, with the effect that the collage prompts us to question the meaning imparted by its various elements. The collage shows us the photographic images that would typically be considered realistic and objective are subject to interpretation, and in the case of this collage, to Hawk's interpretation. In creating my own modernist collage, I stitched together the image of a Victorian nurse, an icon of Victorian femininity that I sourced from the Illustrated London News from 1898, with a picture of a San Juanito dancer, an Indigenous symbol. Stitched together, the figure is intended to symbolize the fractured, incohesive, and often socially co-created identity of biracial individuals. Further, the importance of the tape is meant to accentuate the instability of identity and the uncertain cultural existence of multiracial individuals. The floral print on the tape becomes a binding force, mediating and constraining the expression of cultural identity through the confines of gender. Similar to the ideas invoked in Lucas Crawford's article, Transformations, the piece juxtaposes feminine icons from two distinct cultural and historical backgrounds, recontextualizing the fragments of two symbols that are seemingly out of place in each other's worlds. Following Hawk's example, I wanted to call attention to the physical nature of the elements I use by ripping pieces of colored paper that I assembled and then cut to create a flag. Related to the ideas expressed by data artist Jean Arp, tearing the pieces reflects a durational gesture in which the result was uncertain. These traces of prolonged action were symbolic of the relationship between time and cultural legacy. As multiracial individuals can attest, society often forces one to assume a uniform sense of nationality at the expense of their unique cultural and ancestral history. But by lacking a coherent sense of national and cultural identity, those caught in the middle also perform for their peers, displaying certain characteristics and allegiances to fit into cultural groups. Fittingly, the black curtain-like objects at the top of the image are symbolic of the performative nature of cultural identity. So one thing I learned from completing this project was that collage is a powerful tool for allowing us to communicate messages we otherwise wouldn't have the words to express. Individually, each of the elements I chose for my collage were indicative of some symbolic message. The Victorian nurse, the San Juanito dancer, the Canadian and Ecuadorian flags, each with its meaning that society has chosen to bestow upon it. As collage makes abundantly clear, these meanings can be altered through representation. Collectively, we cannot assume that meaning pre-exists representation, just as our individual contexts play a hand in shaping our identity. Thank you for listening, and I will now be passing things off to Priscilla, who will be speaking about her Rag Rug project.
Thank you so much, Juliana. In addition to the collage project, we as a class practiced a few crafts involving textiles and did a project which involved creating a rag rug. In our class, we learned that an essential part of modern art is staying true to your materials. While creating my rag rug, I didn't understand how I could stay true to the fabric I worked with, because how could a piece of cloth have any truth? Annie Alvarez, an artist and designer, talked about a sensitivity to textile surfaces. And as I worked with different materials, varying in design, texture, and use, I began to understand the truth of fabrics. Because of this, a rag rug to me is like a collage. It is a collection of fabrics. But unlike a collage, I don't have to be deliberate about ascribing any message or meaning to it. Although I select and combine the materials I use, the impression that my rag rug creates on a viewer is dependent on associations they make when they encounter these materials. In that way, Both I as the craftswoman and they as the viewer are responsible for the meaning of the rug. In our class, we also learned about William Morris, who believed that we should take pleasure in our labor and in our surroundings. This belief inspired his approach to designing everyday objects as interesting enough to catch the eye of a viewer, but familiar enough not to displace them. I believe that one of Morris's goals was to ground the viewer in the present, so that as they interacted with strangers, friends, and family, with school or work, they are reminded of life beyond itself, beyond plans, objectives, and tasks. His goal was that an encounter with the everyday object would grant a viewer a moment to reflect, a moment of pause. As a student with many tasks on my to-do list, as I stare at my rag rug, I begin to understand what it means to be that viewer grounded in the present and the importance of a moment of pause. As I stare at my rag rug, it holds an air of unfamiliarity. Annie Albers said about weaving that it was not a retreat from modern life, but an expression of it. Extending that to all modern crafts, particularly rag rugging, looking at my rag rug as an expression of modern life, I understand why it feels foreign to me, as if I didn't create it. It's because I didn't, not really. Neither the fabric nor the technique that I use is my own, but they both tell of cultures that I do not know. They are expressions and preservations of modern life. As I stare at my rag rug, it holds an air of unfamiliarity to me because this object that I created, that is my own, tells of minds and bodies that aren't mine. From this project, I learned that a practice still speaks of its origins. I learned also that much like my rag rug is a collection of fabrics, my life is a collection of moments, none of which are the same. I learned that it's okay that some of those moments are moments of pause, to reflect on choices and decisions, or to simply stare at something unique and beautiful. Thank you all for coming and listening to our presentation.